Okay, we are in Colossians chapter 1. We are picking up in verse 12. This is still the middle of a sentence. And interestingly enough, even when we get through it, it says at the end of verse 14, you say, finally he's done. In actuality, no, he's not, because that's not the end of Paul's sentence in the original. So he has this long sentence going on, but it allows us to kind of break it down. So what we've looked at so far, if we go back and see the earlier part in chapter 1, is he had to establish himself as someone that had not taught them. And remember, that's kind of what he is doing, is showing the relationship in his thanks for their obedience, that they are now Christians, and for all that they have done, and that he is, in a sense, validating them and the work that was done for them. We then looked up, beginning last time, in verses 9 through 11, to talk about his then prayer for them in wanting them to be strong and to continue to be stronger and more strengthened along this journey. And that was what his desire. So he was thankful for them, but he also says, you're not there. I'm wonderful. It's great that you have done this. So now, let's make sure you are growing the right direction and learning things the right way from the right sources. And we'll talk about that later. But as he now is pulling this part to a close, he says, beginning in verse 12, and we'll go ahead and read all of verses 12 through 14 to catch it as a full idea. Giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. So in a sense, what he has done is he's pointed them, he's looked backwards, okay? He's looked backwards at what they did in obeying the gospel first, and the joy that should be there. Then he looked to where they are at the present in verses 9 through 11 and talked about what they need to be working on and use to grow in here. And then he does this, and he now has a hint in verses 12 through 14 of the motivations in looking toward the future, of why. So I just want you to see that general kind of flow of what he is doing, so that he is showing them the positive reinforcement of what they've already done, the challenge of you've still got a lot to do in your Christian life, in your growth, but isn't it wonderful what we have to look forward to in Christ? And that kind of flow is important, I would argue, of how we ought to see a lot of things and how we move forward. So now let's pick up, and beginning in verse 12, he says, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. Now, I want you to stop for just a moment and think about how much do we give thanks in prayer? And what do we give thanks for in prayer? I don't know that how much we examine our prayer life and how we go through certain things, but Paul gives us examples here of what he's doing. Right? But what are some typical things that maybe that we're thankful for? Right? What do we give thanks for the most? Anybody willing to put it out there? Oh, I was going to think food, but okay. Right? We're going to start right there, and if you want your list of where you start, all these things. I'm thankful for the food I have. I was thankful for my warm home last weekend. Right? I was thankful for power lines that are buried in my neighborhood. Right? There's certain specific things you can be very thankful for. Okay. But how often do we see what Paul is thankful for, where that focus is? When he's giving thanks to the Father here, it's for what he's done to make salvation possible for us. And I would think at a core level, that would be where we would want to be and start with our thanks. The most important things we have is everything God had to do. And he's going to be moving he's kind of anticipating where he's moving toward that direction in the next few sections in chapter 1. But giving thanks, again, to the Father, and you'll note that relationship we've noted all the way through chapter 1 of here he is offering his thanks to the Father for what he's done, this relationship, okay? It's not just thanks to God, right? Now, there are a lot of different ways. I think we get in a rut when we begin our prayers. I know I do. I have to work myself out of a rut. Let me explain why I think we should do that a little bit more. I tend to say just, dear God, it's simple, straightforward. But when we start off, as Jesus did in modeling it in the Sermon on the Mount, Father, there's a different connotation to that, isn't it? Now, we're talking about the same one. But it has to do with the relationship that you share and how you see God. And so when he's saying giving thanks to the Father, it automatically evokes or should evoke the idea of the motivations of God. Now he's going to bring in the Son part at the end, if you notice, of verse 13. But it's our Father. He's the Father, and he has done this for us. Well, that ought to tie us emotionally to God too. We should never get to the point of where we simply look at the Bible and it's just an intellectual exercise. Here are the things I know about my Christianity, about God, okay? And because I know these things, these are the things I do, okay? That is core to all this. But if we don't ever let ourselves feel based upon what we know, and that's the correct order, okay? It can be wrong if we're going to feel first and then figure meaning into our feelings. But when we start off and we say, here's what God has done, this is actually what's happened, we ought to feel that and give thanks. Giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us. Does anyone have another rendering on that? Does everybody say, just say qualified? Who made us meet. That's ASV. Okay. Anything else? It's a tough word, but it has the idea of sufficiency. Okay, so if it has the Father who has qualified us or has made us sufficient, it means, and this is important for our thinking, we weren't qualified and we were insufficient without God doing something about it. I mean, that's important for us to remember, or else we end up getting into this idea of who I am and look what I did, versus always starting with thanks to God because of what he's made possible, because of what I lacked. And that's where Paul starts with this. He qualified us. He made us sufficient. In other words, he covered the gap. There was this tremendous gap that existed where there was no way we could have what he wanted us to have. Now he's coming up in talking about how that was possible in the next two verses. But it's important to establish a recognition that we regularly think about that in terms of recognizing it for ourselves, okay? Now, what he qualified us for here, he qualified us or made us sufficient. Technically, it's unto, and that's the point. It says to be partakers. It's hard rendering here, but I'll give you an even rougher, harder way. It's unto the portion of the part. Now you're really confused, aren't you? But the idea, or the lot. Lot is the idea of this section, what would be inherited, what God made available to me to inherit. So my portion of the lot, which has to do with inheritance. When he says it's just unto, though, it's just, here's the purpose. When God qualified us, he didn't zap us, right, to make us better. He didn't reach over and say, bang, there you go. But rather in our response, he's going to mark us down as, combined with what he offered, you've done what I asked, and now you're qualified unto this end. That is, I'm going to mark you down as this is now available to you. And of course, when he says a portion of the lot, or this part of an inheritance, it's only comes, notice, to saints in the light. Now, we already had the discussion about saints, so now we're testing memory now. What does saint mean, and what does that indicate? We say saint. Good, I'm glad I'm really teaching you all a lot. Set apart, okay, that's good. Okay, it means set apart because it's related to a word, holy, good. Sanctified ones. So this is all the people who have become holy, and there is now distinct, and this is key with that word, that they are now distinct. The qualification then he's talking about is all these are put together. You're qualified for this because you are living as in holy lives, so you can be called saints, holy ones. And that is what it takes to do that, is to be in the light. So all of the words in this small little verse are actually qualifying words to say, here's where you've placed yourself based upon your relationship with God and submitting to Him. You've become qualified. You've become heirs, implied with that phrase. You've become holy. You've become in the light. Okay? Major changes, and each one of them has a different kind of idea. Qualified versus that is sufficient. So you've overcome your insufficiency. You're looking unto something greater of an inheritance based upon holy character that then is manifested by where you conduct your life in the light. Right? So that's all covered there. Now look, verse 13. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of His love. Okay. So who is the He? God. Okay, good. The Father. This is actually still the same sentence. They've just simplified it for us. Who has delivered us. Now, that word throughout the Bible especially can mean a lot of different things in general, can it? What does it mean to be delivered? Have you ever been delivered? Well, you're born, so you were delivered, right? It has the idea of a safety to it. The actual word here has the idea of rescued. Because the connotation is there is peril and danger involved. Now, I don't know how many times you felt like you were in danger. It's not a very pleasant feeling, is it? You ever had your life threatened? No? Okay. You got to have your life threatened at least once or something. Because I was held up once, so you have that kind of thing. You have other things going on, so okay. But there's real serious danger here, and you go, okay, what is it going to take? I'm helpless. What is it going to take to get me out of this? The rescue. So when He comes out, He has rescued us from the power of darkness. Now that's authority. Word authority for a power there. Okay, which is an important contrast with what He's about to come up and do with Christ. The authority of darkness. He's already said you're in the light. Okay, light, very consistently going back a long ways, refers to goodness, righteousness. That is, it's just a metaphor for For all that is good, because, as Paul later he describes also in 1 Thessalonians, the difference of that light is like sunshine, and this darkness is where bad things happen. Okay, it's easy to conceal. It's all these kind of things. Light is up front, out there. That's the reason for the metaphor. So it's good. But there's authority of darkness. So if good is tied in with light, then darkness means evil, right? So what is the authority of evil, or the authority of darkness then? That essentially had a hold on you. Satan? Yeah. And I'd say probably, particularly if you want to think about it, sin and death. If you tie in Hebrews chapter 2, 14 and 15, with 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 55 through 57, okay, and the whole idea of the hold that ultimately he has on us is tied to our sin, which then takes us into death as a consequence. That's a prison that we find ourselves in this life. We're imprisoned by our own decision, our choice. We're imprisoned. We've got to deal with ourselves and our sin, the consequences of our sin. But now, in creating this metaphor, is that if Satan essentially has us in a prison of sense based upon our own behavior, then it's the idea of God coming in, and he's saying, the Father comes in and he rescues us out of that environment where that's no longer holds us. I want to go in, I want you to think about that because of how important it is not to take any of these things for granted as Christians, and to revisit your salvation and what it meant for you to become a Christian. That's where they were. They were not walked that far from this, and he's wanting to make sure they appreciate what was done. If we only think, in a sense, if you will, about what we can visibly see at a baptism, very simple kind of action, right? Okay. I want you to think about how long would be appropriate anytime that happens to stop and think about what just happened. And this section is a good example of that. All the things that actually happened in that moment that are unseen. It's not something you can witness. It's because God says this is what you do. And when you do, because I'm God and I promise it, here's what also I will do in that moment. You become qualified. You gain an inheritance. You become holy. You get set on a path in the light. You are rescued. You're no longer sitting under the power of darkness and therefore imprisoned by your sin to be just waiting a death sentence. No longer. All of that changes. All those negatives. And then he says, and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love. Conveyed. Now, I know there are different translations of that word. Transferred. Transfer is pretty good. Translated. I think nowadays translated has to do more with words, doesn't it? It's the idea, though, of we have a current standing, okay, that changes. And so that situation, subject to the authority of darkness, you're going to be transferred out of that cell. and placed instead in a kingdom. Now fully appreciate the full implications of what he is going through, of the picture he's painting. Being confined in the one hand, and now you're in a kingdom. You're placed, transferred into the kingdom. Now, what is important just about that fact that he mentions the kingdom in this way in this passage? It is very important. Because okay, very good. It shows that the kingdom existed at this period of time. Right? And this was written, we go back to around 61 AD. And the kingdom's in existence. Jesus, remember, Mark chapter 9 and verse 1, promised that the kingdom would be established and people of that generation would be there. Okay? So here we are, confirmed that less than 30 years later, or around 30 years later. Confirmed that. Kingdom's here. Now, what does the idea of kingdom mean, though? We don't use that very much. In this time period, that was a very normal kind of thing. Things would be named kingdom as a country. Citizenship, okay, it automatically has some idea of governance and citizenship to it. What else does a kingdom have? It has a king. Yeah, the king. If you've got a kingdom, then there is a king. Okay, and that's also where he's going with this, which is what he says next, because it's the kingdom of the Son of His love. So here we have a kingdom, but if you are in a kingdom, now you are subjects of the king. You've been transferred out of this prison, and you are now a free citizen of this kingdom. Now notice, if you're a citizen of this kingdom, does that mean that you no longer have any responsibilities and you can do whatever you want to do? Not at all. The fact that you're freed from prison, okay, in that sense, and that now you get to be part of this does not mean, why? Because it's not your kingdom. You're in a kingdom, but it's not your kingdom. It's such a better place, though, and they would have appreciated this distinction about being under this authority, power of darkness, oppressive, okay, has the idea of being under an oppressive kind of rule. And now instead, you are transferred into the kingdom of the Son of His love. We're going to get to that phrasing. Some of you may have it in your Bibles as beloved Son, but the wording literally actually is different here. It's the kingdom of the Son of His love. And we have to account for why is that different here and how he worded it. So it's the kingdom of the Son. The Son is already established earlier in the chapter as Jesus Christ. So it's tying back again their relationship, the Father and the Son. The kingdom is the Son's, and what we already studied in 1 Corinthians 15, remember, that he is going to then give up that kingdom. So Jesus is currently ruling as co-regent. His kingdom, but as co-regent because the Father has not abdicated any authority. But he has designated authority in this case. And it's here we are as citizens of a kingdom, and because we're free citizens, we're freed from the oppression, we have the opportunity to inherit, and we are qualified. All because of being in this kingdom of this one who's the Son. And the thing that I want to go back to before we discuss this final phrase of the verse, of what it means father-son relationship with Jesus. What did it mean for him to be the Son of the Father? Does that mean that he's not God? Okay, we can wipe that one away, right? He is God. That's established. Matter of fact, he's going to establish that in short order in this chapter, that he is deity. So it's something about relationship, though, that is distinct. Now, I would argue that what you see with this is what's established at his coming and his incarnation, because he's also man, he is subject to the Father. So you have deity in this case because of circumstances being subject to deity, though being equal with deity. And having the perfect father-son relationship because of that. He did what the Father's will was upon the earth as man. Yet he himself is also God. And as part of this, now we get to this last phrase, the kingdom of the Son of his love, of the Father's love. Now, what are the options when we think? We've already seen one in translation, just his beloved Son. So that means the Son that he loves. Certainly a good possibility here. Is there any other way to look at this? And again, I only do this because Paul knows how to use that term, beloved. He didn't. It's the Son of his love. What are the other options because of that? Okay, so it's God's, so in here we're tying it to the will of God for Jesus to come. Okay, anyone else? He loved the world. Okay, so he sent, so you're tying it just like Gary did, right? Okay, I think so. I want to refine it just a little bit though. That Jesus is because of this, in the Son of his love, he is the manifestation of this love. He's an expression. Jesus is the expression of God's love. Right? Can we agree? He's the greatest expression of God's love. And I think that actually fits the context pretty well. So it's not just that God loved him, though I think that's part of it, but it's also he's the expression of how much God loves for what he did. And if you want to know, verse 14 for me is part of the context of why I lean that direction on this. Because he's now going to come up in verse 14. He says, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. Now let's deal with the phrase first, through his blood, because that does tie in directly to both what Surya said and what Gary said. What does that automatically bring up? Through his blood. Crucifixion, what else? Sacrifice, good. Why? Because going back to there's no remission without the shedding of blood. Right? Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22. Okay? So it's automatically implied in that. Okay, because and remission, and the word for forgiveness is tied to that same word remission, right? So that idea is present. So but if you're going to offer sacrifice and you're going to have shed blood, you have to first also be human. Right? Going back to the point. So this kingdom of the Son of his love, how far does this love go? It went to the point of where God became man and died for mankind. It's interesting in a way, if you'll note, he does not feel the need to argue too much about that point. It's like that point seems to be accepted more. Whereas he has to deal with more of the deity coming up next, and we'll discuss the reasons why. when we get to that. But it's through his blood. Again, you can't have remission of sins without that. Why? Because there has to be the appropriate cost paid. And of course, the writing, when you go back and look at Hebrews, the point there was dropping down to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4, that the blood and bulls of goats cannot take away sin. So you tie those together and say, what can? Now, this is just a little basic theology here. But that's why you had to have perfect man freely offering himself as a sacrifice for man to have forgiveness. And the only way to do that was for God to become man. Because all men have sinned and come short of the glory of God, though really we probably ought to look at Romans chapter 3, 10 and 11, especially rather than verse 23. This is what makes, he says, the forgiveness of sins. Okay, so there's our problem. Okay, and all this is tied up, remember, of why we're in a situation of oppression, why we're unqualified, is we've got sin in our life that has to be forgiven. Now, what do you think? What is forgiveness? This is, again, I said that the word remission, same word. Is we get to these biblical words and we just say, well, that just means, well, what does it mean? I didn't hear you, Bill. No, that we're at your redemption. So we're not there yet. I'm holding off on redemption. The idea of forgiveness is actually a sending away. Matter of fact, the verb is used that way some. To dismiss. It's one of the hardest ones to come up with a core meaning that has anything without sounding silly. But it's God at that moment when the forgiveness of sins is saying, get out of here. Okay, no more. And, that's why when, when we talk about, we hear it used with, aren't we thankful when we get reports of those with cancer that they're in remission? Okay. And while our techniques are still just not quite, we're very good, but, you have that little bit of, can we see everything? But spiritually, God sees everything, and he sends it all away. And the joy you can get, that problem in your body, and they say, that's not a problem anymore. Not for the time being. It's not a problem anymore. That's kind of the idea here that we ought to understand. Now, he again is going back to the original forgiveness. He's framing it in context. But this same idea of what it is to receive the forgiveness of sins, and what it means to have that, please don't lose sight of that. Of what God has sent away. And any time that you pray and that you ask for forgiveness of sins, please think about what you're asking God to do. To remove those things in your, if you will, not in your body, but in your spirit, that are destroying you and killing you spiritually. And he'll do it. So let's now look at redemption. It's really amazing the different verbs that can be used to talk about what's changed us spiritually. Already looked at rescued. Now he looks at redemption. Now what is redemption? So, some of y'all remember what it means to redeem something. S&H green stamps, anybody? I'm like just old enough to remember that. Never was able to get anything with S&H green stamps. I had my eye on a weed eater at one time, and then they stopped doing it. But what is it? You get something, and then you're able then to use that to go out and buy it out. Now that doesn't fully convey what this is, but to redeem is that idea. There's a purchase goes on, okay, which means there was a price paid, right? And now that happens probably best, I'd say, 1 Peter chapter 1, 18 and 19. That we're not redeemed with corruptible things, silver and gold, vain conduct received by tradition from the fathers, but with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Okay, so the idea of redemption, there has to be a price. And this goes back to being qualified. It's just another kind of way of understanding that the situation that you're in as a Christian, how different it is, but also it is always tied to what it took to get you there. What it took for someone to come in and rescue you. What it took for you to be qualified. What it took to get you out of that one and to convey you and transfer you over. And now with redemption, there was a cost involved. And that cost was the blood of God. That's what it cost. Now, I want you to think of this two different ways. Number one, at how pricey sin is when you commit it. And that's the first thing. How pricey sin is. That's what it's going to take to overcome it. Second idea. How valuable must your soul be that God would pay that price for you? That's equally important. If you only think of one, you'll be unbalanced, won't you? You need to remember both. Sandra.
And to me, the most profound piece of that is he knew it before he created us.
Oh yes. We're gonna come back to that thought too before long, Sandra. Not today. But yes, that when he created us, he knew that this would be necessary. Okay, and I'm not going to go into all the reasons why I think why, but that yes, that was the plan. And to think about what it takes to move through that and to create us in this mind with that cost still, but as his creation, you have value. And one of the reasons why, to distinguish this, because it does key into creation, which is the next lesson. For what part of creation did Jesus come and die and give his blood? Mankind? I want you to think about everything that he made. Everything else made, Genesis 1, serves man, was made for man's existence. And man exists for God. And that what's so valuable about us is what's so different about us, being made in his image, Genesis chapter 2, or Genesis 1, 26 and 27, and then when he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, man became a living soul, living being, chapter 2, verse 7, is that we are the only ones capable of that moral choice, either to serve or not serve him. And therefore, if I may, this implies how valuable your choices are spiritually. If we have that this is who you are, you are unique as man for who you are, and the nature of what makes you unique is your moral ability and cognition, moral relationship, to break or to hold on to, then you ultimately, in your choices, are defining your humanity. It's whether or not you are choosing your Creator or not. And it doesn't have to be, or choosing, no. It's just you either choose the Creator or not. And that idea of here are my choices, and that this ultimately determines who I am by what I do, by what I think, by what I become. That is what's distinctive about you. And it is where you offer value. That's where you offer value most. To choose God. We'll pick up there next week.